Bună ziua și bine v-am găsit la o ediție specială Agrointeligența în direct. Sunt gazda dumneavoastră Vlad Macovei, fondatorul Agrointeligența, și în cele ce urmează avem un interviu cu un invitat cu totul și cu totul special, o exclusivitate marca Agrointeligența, pentru că în zona de agribusiness din România s-a produs recent o mișcare foarte interesantă, dar e o mișcare la nivel european cu efecte și în România. Vorbim de fostul ministru al Agriculturii, Stelian Fuia, un om cunoscut și respectat în zona de agribusiness, care în acest moment s-a asociat cu una dintre cele mai importante companii independente din zona de producere a semințelor din Statele Unite, în special în zona de porumb și soia. Vorbim de compania STINE și îl avem alături de noi pe cel care conduce destinele acestei companii, domnul MYRON STINE. Good day, Mr. Stine. I'm very honored to be in our show. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you for having me on your show.
It's morning with you. It's afternoon here in Romania. How can you tell us about this important movement from Europe for Romania and for European agribusiness, this association that you will have with Mr. Stelian Fuia, which is a very known and respected expert in agribusiness in Romania, former Minister of Agriculture. How this did happen?
So we've always done a little work within Romania and within that region over time, and we now think it's a great opportunity at this point where our company is with germplasm to offer the material that we have today to that market. We think it's the best time ever in our company. And so we're working with SOYTEK, very, very excited to work with them. And we have soybean germplasm, but probably the most interesting offer that we have would be on the corn germplasm side and the corn genetics that we have to offer.
For Romanian farmers, which are the majority of Romanian farmers are watching Agrointeligența TV show, and for the experts in agribusiness in Romania, what can you tell us about your company, STINE Seeds? Can you tell us a little bit when you started and what's your focus right now in terms of seeds production and seeds technology?
Absolutely. So we started back in the late 1960s in soybean breeding. And within soybean breeding, we were very successful. By the late 90s, we had some very good soybean lines that worked well within the Midwest of the U.S. market. We created STINE brand at that point to sell this material. And then also we did some licensing work with other seed companies. STINE brand grew, our licensing business grew, our soybean breeding entity eventually, by the mid-90s, the dominant soybean breeding entity within the United States, within the U.S. market. We had over 50% of the market through other brands and then our brand combined together. Then at the same time we were doing corn breeding. The corn breeding was behind the soybean breeding, and to build up a corn germplasm base from scratch. I mean, so it was a new and different corn breeding program relative to what anybody else had out there. We began to offer corn lines to the industry, began to market them actually in the early 90s. And today we're doing so. Today, if you look at the U.S. market, we are possibly, and it changes from year to year, possibly 60 to 70% of the market when it comes down to the soybeans. We're only 1.5% of the market on corn, but we also market STINE brand in Latin America. We are in Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. And we've done research on soybeans down there for years, for the last 20 years. But that market, actually, the corn side has been where we've led our business there. So today, we're Stine brand as a brand is 6 to 7% of the market within the U.S. on soybeans, about 1.5% of the market on corn. I don't exactly know the market numbers for our Latin American business precisely, so I don't want to give those to you on corn, but we're doing well there. And then we're breeding. Our breeding entities in Brazil in particular on soybeans are growing rapidly. So we're excited about that market. But now we feel that our corn germplasm, especially the material developed here, obviously in the U.S., can have an impact within Romania and the surrounding areas in Europe.
So so Latin America, as I see, it's a main focus for your global operations. Why did you choose to focus on Europe now, and especially Romania in this region?
So Romania has some maturities that match up to the maturities of material that we have in the U.S. on corn. And we have a unique corn germplasm bank. And what I mean by that is we have different genetics relative to the other genetics that are in the marketplace. And we feel that those genetics, we can offer the farmer in Romania and the surrounding areas in Europe an alternative and a different product to maximize their yields.
So this alternative, as you mentioned, this alternative includes a new technology, let's say, this high population HP technology for corn. What can you tell Romanian farmers about this technology, and why do you think it's appropriate for Romania?
Okay, so first of all, let's talk some about what it really is. I think it's important for them to understand what high population corn genetics are. Our breeding program was set up differently from the start. My father, Harry Stine, that started the program, had a lot of different ideas relative to other seed companies. And our program's selection criteria, and keep in mind it started in the 70s, our selection criteria began to bring us genetics that were stature, and they favored higher populations. We didn't fully understand what we had until the late 90s, early 2000s. But ultimately, what we found out was we were developing genetics that liked higher populations, that created less biomass than some of the taller, more robust hybrids, and ultimately brought more yield. They brought more yield because if you look at the historical trend of hybrid corn within the U.S. specifically, and we have a lot of data on this, you will see that much of the yield we have over time has come from simply having genetics that handle higher populations. So if you take genetics that were developed in the 1960s and compare those to genetics that we have today, and if you plant those genetics from the 1960s the same way we plant genetics today, you'll find that those genetics will go barren. Many times they'll fall down because they can't handle the higher population environment. We've also discovered that in general, a corn plant puts on about 1/3 of a pound of grain per plant. And for you to think that you're going to dramatically change how much grain per plant you put on, you're wrong. So you don't want to gear your breeding program to develop genetics that put on more grain per plant. You want to gear your program to develop genetics that allow you to plant more plants per acre, and for those plants to survive and handle, you know, the inputs properly. We do think, we don't have hard evidence on this, but we also think that our genetics are more efficient with the usage of inputs such as nitrogen. That's a very difficult thing to measure, but we think they're a little bit more efficient with that, and definitely way more efficient with moisture. And the nitrogen thing could be because technically, you know, there's so much nitrogen in a grain kernel, but in all aspects, we think we have a more efficient plant, and a lot of that's because you just have less biomass, and your objective is to have less biomass and more grain.
So somehow it's a different approach, but in the end, it responds to the problem with the farmers of Romania. But I think it's a universal problem at least in the last couple of months or years. The problem with the drought, and in Romania we have a problem that we don't have too much irrigation. The climate is changing, and we had some very bad years in terms of water in the last couple of years on one hand, and on the other hand we talk about the increase in prices in fertilizer. So farmers, in terms of costs and of other factors, what you said, this approach with this high population genetics basically responds to this new challenges that farmers that grow corn have in Romania. We talk about Romania, but I think it's an universal problem, as I mentioned. Do you think it's
definitely a universal problem? We have the same exact issues here in the U.S. What we have found, the higher population, shorter statured material, in many cases will handle stress better than the older style, taller hybrids. So you have to have moisture, you have to have water to make grain, but we do know that our higher population hybrids handle drought better than older style hybrids. Furthermore, when you talk about the fertilizer situation, and like I said, nitrogen is probably a bad one to talk about, but if you look at potash and phosphorus, P and K, for instance, we do think these plants are more efficient with that. Now, the bad thing is that these plants also have more yield potential. So you're able to plant them at a higher population, and you're getting, you have a greater yield potential. It does take more fertilizer to create more yield. Even though you have a more efficient plant, that doesn't mean that it's not going to take more inputs to raise that yield up on your farm to what you want to see.
Yeah, but on one hand, and on the other hand, higher yield means higher revenue. So basically, it's a game of profitability. If you have bigger cost but much higher revenues, it's okay. And at the end of the day, it's agriculture, it's a business, and farmers should be over the red line. So in Romania, it's a big issue, and I think it's an universal problem too. How you keep farmers beyond this red line of profitability and productivity. Okay, for Romania, I think it's a big change in terms of explaining all this, of promoting, of showing. How did you consider this collaboration with SOYTEK and with Stelian Fuia, and how do you think this partnership will manage to explain all this different approach in terms of genetics with and of technology with Romanian farmers?
From speaking with SOYTEK, they have interest in bringing something new and innovative to this part of Europe, and so we think it's a great collaboration to work with them. They have a lot of interest in our corn genetics, and that's what it comes down to. You're bringing something different, new and different to the farmer, and we don't know our full potential of what our genetics will do in Europe, but we will learn. We will understand that quickly. We want to start off small and then grow this and do it correctly. And SOYTEK just seems to be the best group for us to do that with.
Going to soybean, okay. So we talked about corn, about soybean. How can you tell us about the STINE genetics in soybean, and what's your relationship with the other corporation that STINE works with? Okay,
so we are a world leader in soybean germplasm, and it's not STINE Seed Company per se. Technically, we have separate breeding entities that do this work, but they're controlled by us. These breeding entities work with practically any company in the U.S. That does anything with soybeans. And we have a breeding company that's strongly associated to us that works with Bayer, for instance, on developing their. We have some separate breeding entities that STINE Seed Company has access to that work with other different technologies, other different trait technologies other than what Bayer has. We have a very, very strong conventional breeding program that offers non-traded material. And we feel that definitely within Romania in that European geography, that we have a lot of offerings to bring, from anywhere from a group 00 to a group 6. And then we have a Brazilian breeding entity that's doing very, very late material, anything from a 7 to a 9 on maturity groups. So we simply just have a lot of soybean material.
Do you think that soybean it will be still let's say an opportunity and an interesting yield for Romanian and European farmers, considering that in Europe you can grow only conventional soybean? And we have this discussion in Romania a lot about the fact that, let's say, that EU regulation doesn't allow growing GMO soybean, but we can import basically from Latin America. So, but you cannot grow here. So, do you think that conventional soybean still can be a profitable yield in Europe and in Romania?
So I don't know, and keep in mind, I would like to learn more about your market. I don't know a lot about your market. I will tell you that the germplasm, that the conventional germplasm, is just as good as the traded germplasm. In some cases, I could argue that the conventional germplasm is better.
Please do excuse me, but it's a very important thing that you outline right now, that conventional germplasm is as good as any GMO.
It absolutely is. In fact, I will tell you that our conventional program has remained strong. Our conventional program actually has been smaller than our traded program, and still brought highly competitive, in many cases, higher yielding genetics, because you don't add the additional component, the trait component to the mix, and you don't have to deal with that trait component. You're just using your breeding program to find higher yield, and you don't care about a trait and the purity of that trait within that germplasm. So that makes it easier for a breeding program to find yield.
Yes, I think it's a very encouraging message at the end of the day for Romanian farmers that are still considering growing soybean, because we have a good subsidy from the European Union, from the common common agricultural policy. I think in terms of crops, I think it's one of the best subsidies per hectare that you have for a crop. So somehow Romanian farmers still are still looking at soybean as a very interesting crop in their farms.
I will tell you this. I have two comments on that. We did a lot of work with Roundup Ready 1 when it was first released. And we had a breeding entity that worked solely with Roundup Ready 1. And Monsanto at the time had a breeding entity that worked with Roundup Ready 1. And those two companies collaborated. And they worked very, very hard to develop higher yielding Roundup Ready 1 lines. And they had two very large programs. At the same time, we maintained a conventional program that was a fourth the size, maybe even smaller than that. And at the end of the Roundup Ready 1 product usage, the conventional beans were still out yielding them. And so I always thought that was interesting. And here in the US, the reason Roundup Ready 1 adopted so quickly was simply it took a bad farmer and made them look really good, because weed control was so easy. So I would tell you, in Romania, if you have a farmer that feels that they have a very good weed control system, if they have good weed control practices, they can take conventional soybeans and they can do very, very well.
So you are bringing let's say, some optimistic approach, because what you said and your experience in research, development, and so on, back your saying is that if you have a very good weed control, conventional soybean can be as profitable and as, let's say, the GMO type of soybean.
That's correct. And the key is the grower must always use the newest germplasm. So you can't use a 6 or 7 year old line. You have to continually use the newest lines that are being introduced. And that's how that grower will maximize their soybean yields. If you think about it, just a couple, 2 or 3% in yield gain sometimes can be the net profit of that farmer. So it's important they use the best material they can get their hands on.
Yes,
that's the newest material.
You're absolutely right. Yes. Going back a little bit at your, let's say, business focus, how do you see how STINE Seeds look at European market and an East European market? What is your strategy in this area?
Our main strategy will be to focus on our corn germplasm and introducing that and beginning to understand how that farmer in that market can use that material in max yields on their farm. And that's easier said than done. So it is definitely a challenge, but there's nothing easy in this world that's worth worth keeping. So you want to, the hard things are what are important and bring value and bring progress.
In the next period, SOYTEK and Stelian Fuia will have a lot of demo fields here, some demonstrations, interaction with the farmers, let's say comparative fields to see how the, let's say, conventional and this HP genetics works, and to make the difference. How do you see this process of let's say, of explaining farmers, of showing them transparently everything that is going on with this technology?
So I don't know that market well, but I will tell you, in the U.S., the early adopters, the progressive farmers, are the ones that are using these genetics. And the first hurdle is the grower has to be willing to plant at populations than they normally do. So they have to be willing to plant higher populations than they normally do. They need to put a yield goal out, which may be higher than they normally put out. And then they need to manage that crop properly for that yield goal. Here in the U.S., a grower that simply plants their corn crop and does a regular fertilizer program doesn't do well with high population corn. It's the grower that plants their corn, they push their populations, they do multiple applications of nitrogen, they do multiple applications of fungicide and insecticide. They simply have a more rigorous management program. They do very well with it, and they see a benefit and they see a yield gain. If you don't do those things, you will not see a yield gain. You'll plant your corn at a higher population and say, I see no difference between this corn and the older style hybrids I've been using.
So basically, a rigorous technology at the end of the day is the key for the success of this HP genetics and technology, generally speaking.
A more rigorous management practice. Correct.
Yeah. This is the landslide here in Romania between the farmers that are more rigorous and the others that are not that rigorous. So somehow it's the same situation. Okay, keeping the, let's say, it's not similar, but it's kind of the same thing about the mentality of the farmers between those more rigorous and those who are not so rigorous in Romania, as it is in US, the situation that you described. So somehow we are the farmers are not that different, no matter where they are, in Romania or in the US. It's the same thing.
A big challenge growers have here. We're in 30-inch rows, and for many growers, that's a very common row spacing. In 30-inch row spacing, you cannot plant more than 39,000 plants per acre without crowding your corn plants in that 30-inch row. In many cases, a farmer here on highly productive ground needs 42,000 to 45,000 plants per acre to maximize these shorter statured plants. So these growers that plan to do this, they have to have different equipment. So they have to move to a narrower row spacing, and they can go 20-inch or 15-inch. Those are two very common row spacings here in the U.S. So that's the first challenge, and it's incredible. Look at the advanced growers; they're doing that. They're moving to a narrower row spacing. And if you look at farmers that planted back in the 1960s and 1950s, for instance, they were in a wider row spacing. They were in 30-inch rows or 40-inch rows. And so our row spacings have become more and more narrow. But it's incredible here in the US, that 30-inch row spacing, they're fixated on that. And many of them have a difficult time being more narrow than that.
Talking about, let's say, I don't want to use big words, but at the end of the day, do you see this technology that you propose as a revolution in corn breeding and farming?
I will tell you this: our company is ahead of the other breeding entities on shorter statured, high population genetics. We have a lot of that material. There's a competing company here in the U.S., a very good breeding company that is now working on what they call it short stature. They call it smart corn, I believe, or whatever. It's the same principle. So they're working on trying to find corn hybrids that are shorter because they can plant them at a higher population. They're less biomass. They're easier to it's easier to put a sprayer through the field. All these things, and we are definitely the leader in this technology.
Okay, so you are let's say the most appropriate company, let's say, to explain through your partnership with SOYTEK and with Mr. Stelian Fuia, to explain this and to present this to Romanian farmers.
Yes, correct. You're correct.
Okay. Let's say that somehow I want to end this interview with an invitation. Maybe at a certain time you can come to Romania to hear how the Romanian farmers are performing with this new technology, with the HP genetics, and maybe to have the chance to have an interview face to face, because Zoom, it's very good, so we are using a lot here, even with the Romanian guests. But I will be very glad and honored to come in Romania and to maybe have an interview at a demo field, a demo farm with this new technology in corn that you propose here, together with Romanian farmers. This is what I want to do, and I clearly launch an invitation for you to come to Romania whenever your schedule is permitting this.
No, that'd be wonderful. I would very much enjoy that. I think I would learn a lot from the farmers within that area. And I'd love to be on your show there locally. And by the way, you're welcome to come over here too, if you ever get an opportunity. And there's a lot of things we could show you here in the U.S. on the shorter statured genetics. Yes. And much of the material would work in Romania.
I will definitely find a way to honor your invitation, and maybe we can, let's say, here in Romania first, or there in US first, to have the opportunity to have an interview, let's say, face to face, and to talk more about the extraordinary thing that you do in research and development. It's incredible how much added value a company can give to the farming industry in general. Thank you once again, Mr. Stine. It was a pleasure talking to you and giving this high value information with the Romanian farming, sharing all this. And once again, looking forward to see you. Have a good day, and we will keep you briefed about what is going on in Romania. I think Stelian will do that, with SOYTEK will do that too. And as I mentioned, it was a very good opportunity, even for myself, let's say as a journalist, to be able to get all this information and to have this communication with a very worldwide renowned expert in agribusiness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Dragii mei, aceasta a fost ediția specială Agrointeligența în direct, o ediție cu totul și cu totul deosebită. L-am avut alături de noi pe domnul MYRON STINE, STINE SEED, unul din cei mai importanți jucători în genetica de porumb și de soia la nivel mondial, o companie independentă care tocmai intră cu soluțiile genetice pe care le oferă, cu o revoluție pe piața porumbului în România, prin intermediul companiei SOYTEK, prin intermediul fostului ministru al Agriculturii, Stelian Fuia, unul dintre cei mai cunoscuți și respectați experți, oameni de agribusiness din România. Vom comunica, noi aici la Agrointeligența vom comunica despre aceste noi tehnologii pe care în România domnul Stelian Fuia le propune fermierilor români. Vă invit să rămâneți alături de noi și să urmăriți tot ceea ce Agrointeligența prin intermediul site-ului, a paginii de Facebook, a canalului de YouTube vi le oferă. Sunt Vlad Macovei, gazda dumneavoastră, să ne revedem cu bine, Doamne ajută!